Yes, hello everyone. Welcome to another show of New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. Today our topic is going to be Gulf of Maine wind power. There's a task force meeting coming up December 12th, and there's talk of a intro meeting December 4th that we don't have the location of yet. And we got several people here that have been involved for many years in the process, and they're going to describe what's been going on, what's going to happen, and what we may see happen, or hope to happen anyhow. So, thank you, and let's get this going.
My name is Doug Bogen. I'm director of Seacoast Anti-Pollution League based in Exeter, New Hampshire. I'm also on the steering committee of 350 New Hampshire, which is a climate action group statewide.
Great, my name is Michael Behrmann. I am the business director for the Clean Energy New Hampshire organization in the state. We do advocacy work throughout the state, legislative work on various clean energy issues, and happy to be here.
Thank you.
And I'm Joe Casey. I'm international representative for the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And I work on trying to find opportunities for workers in different fields in construction throughout New England.
So I'll give a brief overview of how we got to this point, why we're interested in offshore wind. I think it's been several decades that, if not longer, that New England has had an energy problem, energy crisis, if you will, that we don't have traditional indigenous sources of energy like gas or oil or coal. And for the longest time, people have been trying to come up with ways to provide more energy, make the region more energy independent. Just in the past decade, literally about 10 years ago exactly, the federal government and the state of Maine as well identified the Gulf of Maine as a major potential source for offshore wind. They determined that theoretically the Gulf has the potential to generate somewhere on the order of 200,000 megawatts. That's many nuclear plants like Seabrook, and that it was just a huge untapped resource. And at the same time, the technology was being developed, particularly overseas in Europe, to tap into this wind power. Many people are familiar with onshore wind, but offshore is a whole different process, same basic technology, but the wind is much stronger offshore, it's more consistent, it is more accessible in the sense that you're not limited by geography as much. So people see a huge possibility of generating much of the future power that we need from offshore. In more recent years, more refined studies have been done that show that the Gulf of Maine could economically provide many megawatts of power, and individual states such as Maine and Massachusetts have moved forward to exploit this resource and develop some of their offshore sites. And particularly Massachusetts, I think, is in the lead at this point as far as U.S. sources. We do have one offshore wind farm, of course, off of Block Island in Rhode Island. It's just 30 megawatts, very small, but it was the start. It was the first to get in the water. But now we're looking at ones that'll be hundreds and hundreds of megawatts. Massachusetts is committed, I believe, to 1,600 megawatts, and actually doubled that amount in succeeding years. But we could see many more thousands of megawatts being developed. So, New Hampshire really needs to get in on the game, and we're really behind the ball as far as setting up the infrastructure, the policies to be able to exploit this resource. I started paying attention to this about 10 years ago when this first reports had come out, and we started to shake things a bit in the state government to pay more attention to this and get active. About 5 years ago, there was a state legislative committee set up, and they concluded that it really is possible, and that the state ought to request a intergovernmental task force, which is the process we'll talk about in a minute, to move forward on offshore waters in federal waters. So that was a big step. Unfortunately, the governor at the time did not pick up on the recommendation, and it took us a succeeding governor to eventually make that request. In that time, 2 years ago, there was an effort to get local officials, local governments on board, and we got 20 communities from one state, one side of the state to the other, from Alstead to Newcastle, most of the Seacoast. Individual towns and cities enacted resolutions calling for the governor to act, and many hundreds of people, did their grassroots lobbying to encourage the governor to act on this. And this was all in conjunction with things going on elsewhere that I think really propelled the issue forward to the point where we're at, where we have this task force in place.
Before we move over to a little bit about BOM, just to give this a visualization of size, they're talking thousands of megawatts of power.
Mm-hmm.
Seabrook Station at full capacity is 1,500 megawatts.
1,200.
No, there's been a lot of work to build up to this point, and in terms of attempting to approve these projects out into the ocean, there is a process that is run through the federal government. We're dealing with federal waters. Anywhere after 3 miles off of our coast becomes federal waters, so that's where the area we're looking at to build these systems. This process of approval, mostly for the environmental purpose of the projects, where it looks at the ocean itself in terms of the floor of the ocean, what it may or may not do to the fishing community. The office that oversees that process is called, the acronym is BOEM, which is the Bureau of Energy Management. That is under the Department of Interior. So earlier this year, January 2nd, Governor Sununu provided the required letter to BOEM to get this intergovernmental task force created, or the task force as we like to refer to it. That task force is made up of representatives from 3 states, Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Those individuals have to be government employees or officials, and so it's a very specific process to identify those leasable areas that developers can then build their projects onto. So that process is just starting, as you mentioned in the beginning of this episode, December 12th at the University of New Hampshire, starting in the morning, 8:30, in the Stratford Room, which is in the Memorial Union Building, will be the first meeting of that task force to begin this roughly 2-year process. There'll be a lot of information provided there. We're certainly trying to get the word out for people to attend. There are opportunities to voice your public opinion. So we definitely recommend, especially this meeting, trying to attend so that a foundational understanding of this market and its significance and what the expectations are moving forward will be.
And Joe?
Yeah, so the offshore wind market right down the eastern seaboard is already well underway. South of us, from Massachusetts down to the Carolinas, there's a significant wind resource. The farther south that you go, the less valuable the wind is. We certainly have in the Gulf of Maine the strongest wind resource in the country, and it will be developed for offshore wind energy for the United States New England grid. Whether or not New Hampshire wants to participate, I certainly hope we do. And it's a $1 trillion industry, and it's going to create thousands and thousands of jobs. there's so many different aspects to building turbines and constructing these projects. And not only New Hampshire, but the United States is already way behind European technology and experience in manufacturing and in construction. And we have to train, we get ready to train a workforce to be able to participate in this. And this isn't on, New Hampshire soil, right? So the Gulf of Maine will be, they'll designate leased areas out there, just like they did down off the coast of Massachusetts. And developers are going to, try to put wind turbines out there and bring their energy to land. And we should be a part of it. And it's going to take a lot of help and a lot of support from the general public and from our legislature and various departments to do so.
So we have a multitude of supply chain and generator issues. One, making the sustainable, clean energy part of our energy supply, and that way we don't have to be reliant on technologies that we have to import or pay out of state. This would be a New Hampshire resource. In regards to developing the generators themselves, I believe we have ENBR, I believe is the ENBW, the German company, possibly looking at Ps and development of the port facilities and all the manufacturing for all the components of these wind generators, not just the generators themselves. Mm-hmm. This would create good jobs, good paying jobs that within the state, unlike the economic study we had presented previously from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. The jobs that were being developed in the state were in the bottom tier, 50%, and they were wages that were decreasing in value, meaning that people that worked these jobs were not keeping up with the economy. Would each of you like to make a comment? All of you have done research in what economics and what industries, and we have some time that we may be able to describe that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Doug?
Well, there's been a lot of work done on the regional level. I think the Northeast, there was a study and to try to figure out how many jobs would be developed with a build-out of offshore wind. I believe they set a figure of 8,000 megawatts, which is now pretty conservative. There's looking at perhaps double that, if not more, in the Northeast over the next 10, 15 years. But that study determined that I believe there were 35,000 jobs that would be generated. Many of these would be long-term positions, not just immediate construction, but operations and maintenance, many different aspects that would be supported. And we're finding that the economics is looking very positive in terms of the initial contracts that were done in Massachusetts, so that these wind farms will be economical, that they'll save money over existing future sources, and that's good for, obviously, for the ratepayers as well as for the overall economy, and we think will lead to much more development in future years.
Just to add to that, there are any number of different areas where work and infrastructure is needed within this area, especially within New Hampshire. There are any number of partnerships as well overseas that could be developed, but we're going to be in need of controls, equipment, operation and maintenance, construction workers, electricians. We have virtually no infrastructure in the U.S. at the moment to be able to support this, so this is effectively a brand new industry for the U.S. and has developed incredibly quickly over the last 2 years, and everybody is trying to catch up and catch their breath as this continues to expand. So there is a lot of opportunity, especially given New Hampshire's business structure, some of the unique infrastructure we do have in the state, and so I think everybody's very excited about beginning exploring those opportunities.
And that's why, right now is the time for New Hampshire to really take a good hard look on how we're going to play a part in this offshore wind industry. So Massachusetts, as we said, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York State, our neighbors, are way ahead of where we're at because they had the least areas. Massachusetts passed legislation for a offshore wind mandate, I believe 1,600 megawatts to be a part of their energy portfolio. Connecticut has done the same, and Rhode Island and New York. So those RFPs have been released. There's developers in place. Vineyard Wind and Shell Energy have the Massachusetts RFPs currently. So just for an example, right? These construction phases will take place over the next couple of years, and those wind turbines need to be built, and that's going to take all of that. And these developers have ordered their wind turbines to be built in Europe because that's where the manufacturing is. The vessels to install these are all European. We need, more than infrastructure, we need out on the ocean to have the experience and the training for an American workforce to participate. And we're trying to work with the developers down south of here to integrate some workers into the actual offshore installation. Any infrastructure on land, certainly the United States workforce can do, but out in the ocean, it's a whole different ballgame, and that's the type of training, certifications, and finding out who can handle that type of work. It's not going to be easy to work on offshore, 12 miles out in the ocean, but we certainly want to take advantage of the opportunities out there and not give them to an established workforce from Europe.
I did want to mention that I believe the Massachusetts activities that we're seeing today, it started about 10 or 12 years ago, I think, when they set up their intergovernmental task force. So we're really, a decade or more behind even Massachusetts. But the good thing is that we can certainly learn from what they did and how that's developed, and hopefully the process will be expedited. The other advantage, in a way, is that with the Gulf of Maine being deeper waters than you see south of the Cape, it's most likely that these will be floating turbines, such as depicted in this artist rendering on the wall, and that they'll be built onshore. We won't need the same technology, the same specialized vessels to install them. They can be built onshore and floated to where they would be sited. So we could see some real advantages in that. Certainly all the construction work being done onshore, we don't necessarily need to rely as much on the Europeans. And I think the whole process hopefully will go a lot more smoother than what we've seen in previous years. So we do hope that it could move a lot quicker than what we've seen in the past. So we need to be looking at our overall energy picture, and we're seeing throughout New England, nuclear plants, coal plants closing, and in coming years there'll be more of such closures just because they're becoming outdated. And so we do need new sources of power. It should also be mentioned that the climate science out there is telling us that we really need to zero out all fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas over the next 10, 20 years if we have any hope to forestall the worst of climate catastrophe. And so, New England, New Hampshire needs to do its part. And again, offshore wind is a major component of a sustainable energy future, particularly combined with solar and other renewable resources. It has the potential to provide 24/7 power in future decades. But a lot of that's going to depend on building the infrastructure, both offshore but also onshore, and particularly with upgrading the New England grid.
As an important consideration in that, as Doug was mentioning, with this transition to a more clean energy future for the state, for the region, that infrastructure, which is aging, there's been a lot put into it, certainly by the utilities to upgrade a lot of the infrastructure, but there needs to be more consideration, and there will be more focus on things like microgrids, what's called smart grids. Energy efficiency is going to be an important piece, but in order to get this generation, which is really what offshore wind provides us, a lot of generation and clean generation, we still have to get that power to where it's needed. And as such, our grid infrastructure, in combination with reducing demands, but storage is going to be a component, other technologies that help us reduce our overall need, but then be able to utilize when needed and make sure that that power is available. There are other technologies that we're going to need to deploy. Also, in considering that a lot of our energy needs are going to be going electric, right? So we have all the devices that use electricity. Heating is going to become more electric based. You've got electric vehicles that are going to continue to grow in a very, very significant way. So offshore wind provides and is expected to provide a very significant opportunity to meet all those needs with clean energy. But it's not just going to be the need for the generation piece of the offshore wind. There has to be a more holistic and total view of our energy needs moving forward from the infrastructure side of things, not just the generation side.
And and New Hampshire's well positioned to be a big player in the energy game. If there's future legislation, and it's done right, if we have developers, who obviously would want to come to New Hampshire to tie into the grid, and for New Hampshire to agree to power purchase agreements, they're certainly in it for profit. And there are unfortunately, our Seacoast area, in Newington, Portsmouth area, and Seabrook area, they have a pretty good industry base and the tax base, and the way you look at New Hampshire, we have a lot of areas that don't have that luxury. And if it's done right, maybe we could start to look at, how we develop and upgrade our transmission in the North Country, how we get those people in the energy game, onshore with, above the mountains, way above the mountains, with, wind up there. There's also good land wind on the western side of our state. And, they need some work and some jobs up in the North Country also. And I think energy is the future for, a really good industry, for good jobs here. As we retire our fossil fuel plants, let's keep in mind, these people, went to work there, because they needed a job. They trained and they learned how to maintain those plants. And if you're working to retire their livelihood, let's make sure they're considered, in the future industries, and and how we can retrain them and put them back to work in good, as good a paying job as they had before.
And I'll add, I think what Joe's underscoring too as well is that if we want this industry to come to New Hampshire, even if you can't make this December 12th meeting, become active and vocal in supporting this industry, because of the amount of jobs, because of the transition in our energy generation to more clean energy. this is one of the largest industries that we can potentially witness within our state in the next couple of decades, potentially. But it needs a lot of support still, and it needs advocates across the board to say, this is what provides those future jobs. This is what can entice certain demographics to the state, so that we can truly witness the benefits from this industry. Unless we have everybody moving and pushing that forward, we may miss out. And I think all of us truly hope we don't. And I think the way it's going, we probably won't. But we still need those voices on an individual level, on a business level, to speak with our legislators and officials to advocate for this industry, so that we can truly witness something truly significant for the state.
Well said.
We're looking at the overall industry here. I mean, the United States is way behind other countries in the percentage of sustainable power, especially wind, as its mix. And in particular, you've all pointed out that New Hampshire is well behind adjacent states in what's being developed. So this is new technology, new manufacturing. Well, some of it's going to be new, but based on old things that we did, but it'll be new here.
Well, it's not too new, though. I'll add, the first offshore wind system was developed in Denmark, and that occurred in 1991. So that system has already been operational and decommissioned since where we're at today. And so the technology is not new. It has grown. We're seeing more generation out of roughly the same footprint because of the size of these systems. The largest turbine that's now out there is almost from the floor to the tip of its blade, almost the size of the Eiffel Tower. One blade is the size of a football field. So these are gigantic systems, and allow for, this system is 12 megawatts, allow for an enormous amount of generation. And so that has changed both the potential scale, the economics, has driven down the price of the electricity, which one of the lowest prices that we've seen was at 6.5 cents. That is competitive with the other resources that we currently utilize and fossil fuel-based resources. So we're at that point where this is, both economically viable, clean energy, has all those benefits from an environmental standpoint as well as an economic standpoint. And so while we are somewhat behind, this is tried and true technology now with very, very significant investment into it. And I think, again, New Hampshire has a unique way to benefit from that.
I think the actual first onshore wind turbine was erected right here in New Hampshire, back in the 80s, or in 81, something like that.
Yeah.
That's back when we were progressive.
So we do want to encourage people to attend this meeting on December 12th in Durham if possible. If you can't be there for the whole day, you can come for just the last portion of it at about 4:30. They're going to be having a stakeholder discussion. In other words, the public can participate. There's also a session at midday around 11:15. They're allowing some public input. But the whole thing will be, I think, very educational. Each state will be describing what they're doing currently, what they hope to be doing in coming years, and we can get a better picture of what the Gulf of Maine has to offer. And of course, there will be future meetings, other discussions as well that people can participate in. So we encourage people to stay tuned, be engaged, learn about it, and speak up for a sustainable energy future.
Well, I want to thank everybody for watching the show. We've just barely, I was real concerned about how much information there was when you start looking at this and how to be able to present it. I'll be more than glad to spend some time with more shows on different parts of this. And I hope you enjoyed the show, and I look forward to providing more. Take care. Have a good one.